Welcome to the Bringing Up Business podcast, where we talk about business and parenting. I am your host, Kaila Sachse, mom of a toddler and owner of a marketing and creative agency called Umari Digital. I'm excited to chat with today's inspiring guest, Heather K. Turner. Heather Turner is a Granite Region certified SCORE mentor. She spent 20 years cooking professionally, and in 2003, she started her own business with the assistance of a SCORE mentor. She currently teaches social media and marketing for small businesses and mentors, and she co-mentors in the chapter for marketing and social media for startup businesses and for existing businesses who need some help and guidance in the digital age. She also specializes in working with the hospitality industry for operations, both starting a food business as well as in business. Heather, welcome to the show. I'm a huge fan of SCORE and I cannot wait to talk about it.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, same. Thank you for being here. So it's important to note really quick, we are going to be discussing specifically about SCORE and what that program is all about. And we want to respect their code of ethics. So we will not be talking any specifics about your business, but instead we're going to keep the conversation high level. And just so we can provide some context, let's do a quick deep dive into what SCORE is. So Heather, what is SCORE?
All right, so SCORE is nationwide. It has been around since the 60s, and there are chapters, sometimes multiple chapters in every state. And SCORE mentors run the gamut of experience for pretty much, I think, every type of industry and profession that I've come across so far. And I'm completely biased when I say this. I think it's a fantastic organization. I've been volunteering for about 6 years, a little over that now, about 6.5. And I've worked with mentors not just in my own chapter, which covers most of New Hampshire and a little bit slice of Vermont, but from mentors in many, many other chapters all over the United States. And it's just a wonderful experience and a wonderful whether you're a client coming in and you need business help or whether you're volunteering as a mentor. And from the perspective of a mentor, it's just incredibly rewarding being able to help businesses, again, whether they're starting or whether they've been in business for many years. And I've worked with quite a few of both.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So you are not alone in saying that you are biased in loving SCORE. I also have a soft spot in my heart for SCORE as well. SCORE has helped me level up my business in ways that I didn't even know possible. And it's also afforded me different opportunities that when you mentioned being a mentor and that feeling fulfilling, that resonates with me as well. I've donated my time giving speeches and hosting webinars, and I just feel so good after. We're giving back to the business community.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
You
so good.
And I could probably go off the rails and talk about SCORE for hours and hours, but I think it's one of those little known resources for small businesses. And the fact that it's free is just phenomenal. And I think more people honestly should take advantage of that. And I think it's interesting because SCORE used to stand for, and I hope I'm getting this right, the Social Core of Retired Executives. And SCORE rebranded a few years ago, and it's just SCORE for the life of your business. And originally, it was just people that had been retired or recently retired. And now it runs the gamut of people that have retired, recently retired. Our own chapter has, I would say, probably about half of them are either still in business or partially retired. So it's great that we have such a huge, broad spectrum of both the workforce and, again, the expertise that it's out there. When I give workshops, which we do in our chapter, we usually do 1 or 2 per week. I love doing the little intro sales pitch, which says, and I'm going to do our sales pitch about SCORE. That's not a sales pitch because we're not selling anything. And if people haven't heard that yet, I usually get a chuckle or two out of that.
That's a good one. That's a good one. And just to clarify, SCORE this is my understanding of it, correct me if I'm wrong, but SCORE is a subchapter of the SBA within the United States.
We are a resource partner of the SBA, similar to the SBDC and CWE, so Small Business Development Centers and Center for Women in Enterprise. So we are partially funded by, and we work very, very closely with our local SBA And we do, I think, at least one workshop with them per month and talk about government contracting and what's available for SBA loans. And I think from the perspective of being a mentor and being able to be more educated about what the SBA offers, it's a really good insight into that I wouldn't normally have had otherwise.
Yes, yes. And we don't want to get too off topic, but the SBA is a valuable resource for small businesses as well because the SBA can provide funding. Is that correct?
Mhm. Well, the SBA does not provide funding
Mm.
directly.
Okay.
Provides how can I put this correctly? The availability of loans to small businesses through banks. So it's kind of the more general way to put it. So you're not getting money directly from them.
Yeah, they're almost like a connector between the small business and the bank. Interesting. Very cool. And so score mentors, is every score mentor a business owner? Have they been a business owner previously, or what is the gamut of experience there?
Well, I would say the majority of mentors are business owners. We do have people that have been in upper management, for example, or are specialized. So maybe their whole career has been in mid level. I'm just going to make this one up, but just kind of a gauge of who I've met so far and talked to. They've been maybe had a lot of sales experience, for example, and might have managed a business and not necessarily owned it, but they have the expertise that we're looking for. When mentors come in to be a mentor, they go through a fairly significant vetting process. So it's not like applying for a job. We want to know who you are, your background. You're interviewed by a couple of people. They look into the backgrounds of those people and just get a general idea of whether they're going to be a good fit. Because we want to make sure that when people call us and clients need our services, that there's a good match there. Clients come to us, they talk about personal things, they talk about financials, there's a whole gamut of things, and we wanna make sure that there's that comfortable match there.
Yeah, yeah, that completely makes sense. And at what point would somebody reach out to SCORE for resources? I mean, is there only just the mentorship? Is there more resource to SCORE? What is the offering?
So score.org has workshops that are a lot of them are on a weekly basis that are live. There's a whole ton of recorded ones, but there's an awful lot of articles, white papers, to-do lists, financial projections. So if someone's looking for something specific, obviously reach out to a mentor. It's completely free, but go onto the score.org website and dig around in the files because there's pretty much, I've not found anything quite yet up to date that I have not been able to find there. I think the one thing that I always tell people is if they are looking for a score mentor, please make sure that you feel comfortable with them because it does need to be a good match. And if it's not, that's okay. It's free. Don't be afraid to request somebody else. And the other thing I tell people is we're all experts in a lot of fields, but none of us are experts in everything. I would completely adore if I was an expert in everything, but we know that's not humanly possible. But I think the fantastic thing about SCORE is that we can bring in additional mentors from our own chapter, but any other chapter in the United States. And I think one of my favorite stories to tell is I had a Score client that I still meet with occasionally every 6 months or so, about 3 years ago, who was writing a book, and he's written a couple since then, and when I met with him, I could help him write his business plan, I could help him review the website, work on marketing, do his work on his financials. I knew absolutely nothing about book publishing, and I found a mentor in I'm gonna remember to say it properly according to them, Nevada, who had been a book publisher and owned a book publishing company, and she came in, she sat in on several sessions with me, and I learned so incredibly much. And I've actually this is I can't tell you what, but I published a couple of self-published books since then using a lot of that knowledge that I myself gained. And I think that's one of the pluses of being a mentor is you learn so much by interacting with other mentors and just being able to have access to that content both on the national level and on the chapter level. So, it's for someone like me who's like in constant squirrel mode, like, oh, bright shiny objects, that's perfect, and I think that's part of why I love it a lot too.
I completely resonate with that. I love working with clients from different
Mhm.
industries because I just want to learn about everything, And it's like, okay, I got to stick to what I'm good at.
Mhm.
I'm good at the marketing, I'm good at
Yeah,
the graphics. But like, gosh, I would just want to know about all these different industries. They're so fascinating.
right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, it's super cool to hear that somebody could go to you or go to any score mentor and say, "Hey, I need help with my business." Period
Yeah.
dot. Period dot. And you could say, "Okay, cool. What is your industry? What's your business?" They describe it to you, and if it's not quite within your wheelhouse, that's fine. There are other mentors who can offer that insight.
Yeah, I think it's great because I mean, last year there was a restaurant we were working with down in the DC area, and it had 6 different restaurant hunters from 6 different chapters all over the United States, each specializing in something different. And it's great because sometimes when you start working with a mentor in another chapter in another state, they know like, oh, you specialize in this or you specialize in that, so you start working with them more often too, which is just fun. It's great to network with other people and again learn the expertise of other people too.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. How cool. Okay, so, say if I'm a parent and I'm looking to start a business, I mean, is that
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
So I would say as part of my sales pitch that's not a sales pitch is for us here, whether you are starting a business, just thinking of starting a business, or you've been in business for many years. And, not every business is going to fly. Not every business is a good idea. It is not, and this is in my own words, this is not the words of SCORE, but I know that they're pretty much on the same page and most of the other mentors are, is it's not our responsibility to tell people that this is not going to work. It is our kind of our responsibility, and again, in my own words, that we're to get them to understand and that this is not a good idea. Like, have them go through financial projections to think that their fantastic idea that's going to work is probably not gonna bring in enough money to live on, just as an example of that. We don't wanna ever have people disappointed and, because there's always a great idea out there. Sometimes it's just not at the right time or it needs to be tweaked. And sometimes it just needs a lot of tweaking. I mean, I've had clients come to me where they wanted to open a certain type of business, and we walked them through the whole business plan. And they kind of decided, we really don't want to do that. That's not our passion. And I'll give you an example of this. I had a couple I was working with and I'm still working with who wanted to open a gourmet food market on the coast of New Hampshire. And they both had food backgrounds. And after a whole bunch of discussions, gave them a lot of homework to do, which they tackled in spades and came back and they definitely had the entrepreneurial spirit. And we had the discussion that like, are you guys gonna be happy doing this in a couple years? And they're like, no, we really don't. And they actually opened a restaurant and they're doing phenomenally out in the Adirondacks of New York. And that's really their passion and they're working like crazy people, but they're happy because that's what they really wanted to do. And that's the kind of story that I love.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, would you say that passion or just general joy around a topic is required in order to be successful in a business?
I think it is just because I've talked to so many people and I'll take my next door neighbor as an example, who was never a SCORE client, although I was trying to direct her in the direction. And she wanted to open in this area. I live in rural New Hampshire, and she wanted to open uh, like a food truck serving coffee and bagels. And she doesn't have that experience before. And she's like, "Oh, should I start this?" And I said, "Well, if you want business experience, I'm your next door neighbor. I should not be your SCORE mentor because you're a friend as well. Call SCORE." And she didn't get to that point, but we had a lot of discussions. And I said to her, I said, "Why do you want to do that?" Well, she thought the area needed it. And I said, "Okay, maybe that might be so, but is this something that you're gonna really enjoy doing, serving coffee and bagels out of a food truck?" And she kinda thought about it and she's like, "No, not really." And she kind of redirected. I started asking her some questions like, "What do you like to do? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you think that in 5 years you would still find really, really interesting?" And she goes, "I really like organizing people's stuff." And I haven't talked to her in a few months, but she apparently started a personal organizing business and she's happy as a clam. So there you go. So yes, to answer your question, I think to have a successful business, I think it does take some passion And just to circle back and think about why you want to start this, I always talk about, and I'm actually giving a score workshop on this in a couple of weeks called Getting Out of the Valley of Despair. Have you ever heard of the emotional cycle of change?
No. Okay, tell us some
Okay.
things.
So
I'm so
so
curious.
basically it's commonly used in project management, and it's kind of an upside down bell. So people start out in business what we call uninformed enthusiasm. Hey, I want to start my own business. I want to be my own boss. Nobody's gonna boss me around. I'm gonna work my own hours. And then that's like the high level. And then they start to dip a little bit. Like, oh my gosh, it's a boatload of work to do this. And then they start going into, wow, this is a lot of work to do this. And that's the valley of despair. And if they can get out of that into that informed optimism and get out of that, that's when they succeed. But there are people that get into that valley and that's where they quit. I think it's important to recognize that, and there's ways to get out of that valley by kind of circling back and thinking about, like, why did I want to start this in the first place? I wanted to be my own boss. I love what I'm doing. So there's some placeholders that you can put in that I think can help get you out of that if you really want to start it. I think some people, my husband's a perfect example. Don't tell him I said that. He's always talked about starting his own business, but he doesn't have that, and he knows it too. We've had that discussion. He doesn't have that entrepreneur spirit. Just because he started to write a business plan, he's like, yeah, this is too hard. Like, if you're not going to do that, you're not going to launch the business. Just being honest here.
Yeah, yeah. How would one know if they have that entrepreneurial spirit or not? Is it something that you just know, or do you kind of figure that out?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, isn't it?
Eh.
Well, so that I wish there was a perfect answer for that, because I've had people come and talk to me where they're just like super, super enthusiastic about things, and everything you throw at them, do the business model canvas, which is a one-page business plan, do your full business plan, do your financials, do your location assessment, and they do it blah 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 blah. They like totally, totally into it. And then they kind of peter out for whatever reason. And then there's people that don't really put 100% into starting it, but they still start the businesses. So there's no easy answer to that because it's kind of all across the board. I mean, I think the ones that are most successful, and this might be a bit of a biased opinion based on what I have seen in the past 6 years, though, is the ones that do their homework, that stay enthusiastic, that are really into their product or service. Those are the ones that are doing well.
Yeah, yeah, that makes
Mhm.
complete sense. It makes
Mhm.
complete sense because when you are really into something, I can speak for myself. I have been so into what I do that yes, I used to put in really long days before I had my son. Now I just don't have that luxury. Like I need sleep and I also need to watch my kid and, take care of the house. Um, but I would put in these crazy long days and it didn't feel the same as when I had worked jobs, did double shifts, did things that just weren't really interesting to me. It's just a very different type of work and
Mm,
feeling.
it is.
Yeah, yeah, and then there have been moments where I'm like, "I am done with this, I am frustrated, I've hit a wall," and then the next morning, I'm like, "Oh, that was just a silly little fleeting feeling, I'm back in this, I love it," you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, to me, it's interesting because I think some people have that, I want to be my own boss, I want to set my own hours, you know, and then they sometimes they do get into business and then they realize that they don't like it because it's not structured enough. I know I've run into a ton of people who have home-based businesses, and from I can speak for myself. When I had my office in the house for many, many years, it was difficult, not so much that I was getting distracted, but shutting it off. Some people have that issue of, well, I'm home, the laundry needs to be done, or I got to walk the dog, or whatever. So I've seen both sides of that. Where when I was in the house, I was like checking my email before bed at 10:30 at night, and like when I woke up at 6:30, it was like the first thing, yeah, business, business, business. But there's also the people that can't hyper focus on work, and they go the opposite extreme. So it's, I think having that business, especially a home-based business, can be even more of a challenge for a lot of people versus having an actual brick and mortar office somewhere where you have that clearly defined line.
Yes, yes. I have a neighbor who she works outside of the house, and her husband take turns watching their kid, between work for both of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And she and I were chatting, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you work from home. That must be so nice." And I was like, Yeah, it is nice. And also just a different type of animal. You just have to figure out how to work it in a way that's actually effective and efficient, is so that, I'm not checking my emails at 10 o'clock at night, or I'm not checking them while I'm trying to cook or take care of my son or whatever, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
And now, a quick message from our sponsor. Looking to take your brand, team, or event to the next level with custom gear that stands out? Virtue Screen Printing is your go-to one-stop shop for high-quality custom apparel and accessories. Whether you're launching a clothing line, gearing up your staff, or repping your squad, Virtue brings your vision to life with custom hats, shirts, hoodies, socks, beanies, and more. We're not talking cookie cutter merch. This is premium, fully customizable gear made with care and attention to detail. What makes Virtue different? It's simple. Low minimums, fast turnaround, hands-on customer service, and a passion for helping brands look good. From bold designs to subtle branding, they do it all, and they do it right. Visit virtuemfg.com to get started, or hit them up directly for a custom quote. That's virtuemfg.com, where vision meets craftsmanship. virtuemfg.com. Thank you for staying with us, and back to the show. So, if I'm a parent, I'm looking to get into business, and say I'm looking to do a home-based business, how should that be structured? What kind of structure could be implemented in order to make that work?
That's a conversation I actually have had with more than one client in the last 6 years. And I think every mentor handles this different. Everyone has their own mentoring style. I've worked with probably several hundred different mentors, not just from my chapter, but all over, and everyone has their own swing. My feeling about it though is you need to, and I always tell people, you need to put your priorities straight. Is your priority family first and then business, or is it business first and then family? If it's family first, which is something that, and I tell them, I said, from a personal perspective, I have kids, my kids have kids, they should always come first. I can't tell you how you should structure your own business, but you really need to think about that first. And if your family is first, you need to structure your business around that. So, can you work hours that are going to be copacetic with, your kids getting back and forth from school? Is this something that if you have an emergency at school and you need to go talk to somebody at school or whatever happens, can you go to their sports games when they get older? Because, and I think we had this discussion when we talked originally. When I was in the restaurant business, I missed a lot of my kids growing up, and I will always regret that. If I could do that all over again, yes, I definitely would do it completely differently. But sometimes you don't think about that until after the fact. And, it was part of it. I mean, I was not an entrepreneur at that point, but I was definitely very, very motivated in my business. But I think if I had been running my own business at the time, I would have hoped somebody would have, shaken me and gone, "What is wrong with you, Heather? Wake up, wake up." But people need to prioritize that. I can't say there's a wrong answer for that, but my personal one is family should be first. And, I just say if you want to go that route, which I personally would suggest, let's try to create a business plan and a business that is going to work around and work for you and work for your family. And most importantly, to bring in money because
Yeah.
that's you need that to survive.
Kind of the point of a business is to make
Yeah,
some money. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's understandable how easy it is to fall into the trap of work first in this society where, hey, we've got expenses. We have
Hmm.
expenses, and we are constantly being told, it's like the typical trajectory of like, go to college, get a good job, work really hard, buy a house, then have your family. And I think that thinking is so deeply ingrained, especially in my generation. And I'm starting to see this where we want to have our ducks in a row before we start our family. We kind of realize that it's almost impossible to be able to do some of those things. Not saying that things are impossible, but they're very challenging, right? And then, okay, so in my situation, we decided to just have the kid because at the end of the day, my biological clock is still ticking. Let's hop on this opportunity now before it ends. And then it's like, okay, well, now we have to rework all of these priorities because hitting $2-3 million before having a child is just that's an old plan that has to be reworked.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
You have to make sure it works for you. I mean, and some people do have that entrepreneur spirit, and we just talk about the fact that you've got a great idea, you've got a great plan, it's going to be successful, but maybe this is not the right time for it. You know, you have a 2-year-old. Okay, what is it going to look like when they're 4 or 5, for example? Well, great. Don't abandon your business idea because it's a great business idea, but this look at it from the perspective of this gives you more time to work on it. Yeah.
ooh, that's
You know,
good.
so always keep the goal in mind. You're an entrepreneur, you wanna start something, you wanna work for yourself, you wanna make sure everything works, family and business works together. This gives you additional time to plan. The businesses that just kind of jump into it, and I think I mentioned this before, that don't do the research, that don't put the work in, those are ones that they can work, but they're rarely as successful as the ones that are planned out. And I have seen that where sometimes it takes a couple of years to really put all their ducks in a row. And, they've strategized, I can't even say that.
It's okay. Strategize. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They've created a strategy where maybe they've thought of different directions for the business to go, and they've really, I would say, overthink it, but they've thought about it and let it process more, and thought after a while, well, I thought I wanted to do this originally, or I'm a service business and I want to offer these 6 services, but after thinking about it, I don't really like to do 2 of those services. So why am I doing them? Let's focus on the 4, and how can we market those? So sometimes pulling back and making sure you're in a better financial position to do so too is really helpful. When I started my own business with the help of a score mentor, uh, we had a very interesting discussion where I had her. She'd had me do the financials and the projections for my business, and I did all of the things that she requested of me. And when I gave them to her, she basically said, she didn't really say, "You're gonna hate me for this," but she kinda said that in a nicer language, and she said, "I want you to redo these," and I was like, "No, no," and I'm like, "Why?" And she said something like, "I want you to think of kind of the lux tax or the luxury tax." She says, "I want you to think about the fact that, you wanna go out to dinner occasionally, you're married, you wanna go see family, maybe you wanna go buy a new suit, you want some actual luxuries." And she said, "Did you kind of build that into your projections?" And I said, "Well, no, not really." And, we had a frank discussion, and she says, "Are you happily married?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And she said, "Do you want to stay happily married?" She was a little blunt, which is fine because I tend to be, and I was like, "Well, yeah, of course." And she says, "Think about the number one thing that most people fight about is money." And she said, "Do you want to be stressed?" And I said, "No." And I said, and it was great that we had that conversation, because when I first started the business, I ended up working for about a year plus part time as an office manager. It wasn't the glorious job, but it was great to be able to build my business up to the point where I could actually make it and be able to go out to dinner, for example, versus being completely stressed out. And I'm glad I listened to her because I don't think I would have really made it if I had just gone forth with my additional projections of just quitting the job and going full force ahead. So I try to have that discussion with people, especially if they're not in a place where they can just quit their job for 6 months or a year and work on the business. If they've got a mortgage, if they've got rent, if they've got ongoing bills, and maybe their credit scores aren't that great, and they don't have money in the bank, think about that. Do you want to start a business and in 4 months you're going to be so stressed out that your whole your head wants to explode and your family life is not good. People don't sometimes think about that process.
Mhm. Mm. Oh
Mhm,
my goodness. Money is so
mhm,
integral to a business's well-being and a
mhm,
family's well-being, including the relationship who is
mhm.
heading the household. Wow, that is huge. So if somebody wants to start their business and they have to think about their financials, I mean, what does that look like? Are we writing down all of our personal stuff and then including what does the Lux
Well,
tax look like? How
Well,
does
no,
this
what's next looks like so I did basically when I did my projections for my own business, I did, okay, mortgage, insurance, business expenses, gas, car payment, all the normal expenses that I would been paying. And then, the normal things that I would pay for a business, licensing, et cetera, et cetera. And then kind of built into, well, I'm expecting to get, this many clients, paying me money per month or per job or, however, I don't even remember how I based it. It was so long ago now. And then basically she just said, add some extra in. Add some, I don't think she said fluff, but that would be a good way to put it. Add a little padding in, just to be able to say, maybe you had a slow month, but maybe you've got some extra to put in the savings bank too. We had a discussion then, and I try to have this discussion with people starting a business now. Is when you start the business, you build a website, you've got your initial startup expenses, but a lot of people in business rebrand in a few years. They redo a website in 3 to 5 years, and that's typically not cheap if you're going through a web developer. And I say when you start off, just because you put away all your initial big business expenses doesn't mean that when you go and if you're in business for a while, you're not going to need a fairly sustainable chunk of money to, redo things because if you redo your website, you're going to have to redo your business cards and your flyers and your other literature and any other branding you have too. I just always tell people, if you're starting in business and you're good to go, start putting just a little bit of extra money in the kitty aside for when you want to go do that. And then you're not putting it on, credit cards or having to take a loan out for it at that point.
Yes, yes, it sounds like cash is king. Why are credit cards I mean, this is now a little bit of a financial talk, but it's important. Why are credit cards and loans dangerous for a small business?
Because it's so easy to get upside down, especially on not just credit cards, but loans too, where, you've taken a loan out, for example, you've had a bad month, maybe your business is an outdoor business. Let's pretend you do kayak rentals, for example, and you have an extra rainy summer and your typical income is almost half of what a normal summer is. And you say, okay, this is a temporary, I'm going to take out a business loan just so I can pay my bills, pay my vendors, continue to operate. And then the next year, the rainy season is even worse. And so at that point, you're hitting that downward slide, and it makes it so much hard to recover. I always tell people if you're going to have a business credit card, for example, do not run a balance on it if possible. Try to pay it off at the end of the month if you can. And it's one thing if you're, going to buy a Dell computer, for example, where you're on a payment plan where it's zero interest, fine. But if you pay something on a credit card and it's got a high interest rate and you're paying the minimum every month, you're basically paying the interest off. You're not paying off the primary. Once you start, spending $200, pay the $200 off. It's not that much. Once it starts to add up incrementally, and all of a sudden you owe 10 grand instead of 200.
Yep. Yep, it starts to snowball.
Mhm,
It sounds like financial literacy
mhm.
is also really important for someone who wants to go into business for themselves.
It is, and you don't have to be an accountant or a bookkeeper. It's just to understand your expenses and understand, what your time is worth and think about that. I always tell people, put down what you would want to be paid. What is your time worth to you? And some of it that ties into marketing. So I know social media, so everybody loves social media marketing. And social media is not the end all and be all of marketing, but people sink so much time into it and I asked people, I said, "It's all about the money when it boils down to this." I said, "If you're gonna go spend 3 hours a week on Instagram, that's great. how much is your time worth? If it's worth $60 an hour, are you bringing in that 3 hours times the $60 an hour? Because if you're not, why are you doing it?
Yep. 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 Oh, that is brilliant. And I also think too, if I am being paid a certain amount, does it make sense for me to be doing this task, or should I hire somebody else to do this task so that at the same time I could be bringing in the income that actually justifies that expense plus profits?
Yes. Well, and that's exactly right. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But I think a lot of people on this really surrounds social media, particularly, but a lot of times other things that businesses spend money on, they don't take a step back and evaluate it quarterly. So I'm spending money on this business association, and I'm spending $300 a year on it. And basically, all I'm getting is a business listing. Am I getting business from it or not? Granted it's only $300, but 300 here, a couple hundred there, $50 here, it all starts to add up. I'm a huge fan of business associations and chambers of commerce, but if all you're looking for is to get the link on the website, you're not doing yourself any favor. Go to the networking events, put an hour into your calendar. Yeah, and this is probably one of my favorite stories about that is back when I lived in Connecticut, there was I have worked with a lot of bed and breakfasts over the years, legal bed and breakfasts, like the old traditional ones. And there was a local bed and breakfast owner that was very involved in the chamber. And I think there was 3 or 4 other bed and breakfast owners that were also members of the local chamber. But she came to all of the events. She volunteered at a lot of them. She was an ambassador for the chamber. She had a couple of business after hours and some lunch and learns at her B&B. So everybody in the chamber knew her, and nobody ever saw the other bed and breakfasts. And when people came to stay in the area, or someone had a business association that was looking for a place to stay, who do you think they sent it to?
Right.
And realistically, she might spend an hour or 2 per month at this, but it came back to her because she was getting to know everybody.
Yes.
People don't really recognize the value of that sometimes.
Yes, there's a tremendous value in relationships. At the end of the day, that's what business is, right? You are working with other humans, you're creating win-win scenarios with other humans. So you want to have those relationships, and it's not in a manipulative or gross way, right? People can smell that from a mile away. It's that genuine like, "Hey, how are you
Mhm.
doing? How are things going?
Exactly.
Let's connect."
Well, I always look at it from the perspective of people I think are more likely to buy from someone you know. And actually, I take that back. I'm not going to say I think. I know that they will buy from people that they know. Versus, I saw your business on Facebook, and I'll just call you. Versus, I met you and I talked to you, and you're a real person. I can put a name to the face.
Right. Right. That completely makes sense. Oh my goodness. There are so many gems to chew on. So if I'm starting a business, I've got to think about my financials.
Yes.
I've got to think about whether or not it actually works for me, if it's going to fill my cup. I've got to think
Yes.
about how is this going to fit into my life, or how can I restructure my life to make this work? If the timing's not now, maybe it's later. That's okay. We have more time for planning, and know that there are resources out there. Starting a business, you're not alone. There are plenty of people who can help. Score is a huge resource. There are also other resources too. Just reach out to your network and see who knows who.
Yes. Yeah, and it's not just the professional associations. There are so many resources that are free out there that are not just the traditional ones. But I always tell people, if you're starting a business, especially in the startup phase, it's always good to have an accountability partner. Have somebody, a friend, close friend, family member who's going to have your back, who's gonna be there when you sink into that, "Oh, I don't know if this is such a good idea or not," to be there to cheer you on. They don't have to be a coach, but they can be a motivator, and somebody to say, "Hey, your SCORE mentor, your SBDC mentor said you need to work on this. Hey, did you work on it?"
That personally, my husband is that person for me. He's somebody who I go to and I'm like, "Hey, I mentioned earlier, I hit the wall. I've hit the wall." And he's like, "Yeah, it's just the wall is this high. You can jump over that." So it's good to have that cheerleader in your life to just keep you going.
Well, I think it helps, especially from a women's perspective. A lot of women entrepreneurs suffer from imposter syndrome,
Ooh.
and having that cheerleader or cheer guy in the background, cheer person, I think really can help with that, have that kind of positive reassessment and reaffirmation, just helps get you keeping going. I think everybody, no matter where they are in the business phase, whether you're starting, you're in business, you're just planning it, or you've been in business for years, we all run through those slumps.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little more about imposter syndrome. What is that? What does that look like?
So imposter syndrome is am I and I think I don't know if you remember SNL, and this may not necessarily be relevant, but SNL used to have a character in it that would look in the mirror and say, "Am I good enough? Am I strong enough? Do people like me?" Or something similar to that. And imposter syndrome is basically like, can I really do this? Do I have the knowledge? Do I have the power? Do I have the mental, physical strength to do something? And I think a lot of it depends on people's backgrounds and their upbringing, and also the resources that they've had growing up in the past and in the present. So I know some very, very successful business people that have gone through a huge part of having to deal with imposter syndrome because of what's happened to them in the past. But I think on the flip side of that, that's made them a stronger person and a stronger business person too. But getting over that and dealing with that can be really, really difficult for some people to do.
Right.
There
Right.
are there are resources out there that can help too. I know I'm drawing a blank on there's a couple of good books that are out there about that, and there's coaches that can help walk people through that as well to kind of say, you are good enough, you can do this, and at least myself, and I can speak for most of the other mentors that I worked with. A lot of that, what we do to people is, hey, you're doing a great job. I know you're getting stuck on this, but you can work through this. You got to this point where, you've done all this work, you're motivated, you want to do this. Don't give up, keep going. So there's a little bit of coaching in there. We try not to do too much of that, but that's also kind of prodding. No, prodding is not the right word. Gently massaging people into that position where they do keep going and they don't give up with that.
Yeah, yeah. I know for me personally, I've hit moments where I'm like, I don't the you saying I don't know enough, that is something that
Hmm.
it is an old tape that plays in my head. I don't know enough. I need to learn more. I need to plan more. I need to get more of these ducks in this giant oversized row that is ridiculously too large for this whole thing. I should just do the thing. And so, instead of getting stuck in the analysis paralysis, I find that the action for me personally is what helps me get through that
Yes,
slump. Yeah, taking
exactly.
action. Oh my goodness. Heather,
Helps.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, the action is kind of an important crucial.
But my favorite little tidbit for when people are kind of like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this," is there are such a small percentage of people that even think about starting businesses, and the ones that get to the point where they actually start them, it's like less than 1% of the population. If you think about it, so I'm like, anytime you feel like you're in the dumps, just circle back on that. You're a very, very small fraction of the population that's even gotten to that point. Pat yourself on the back a little bit for that one.
That is good. It's so true. It's so
It is
true.
it is true.
Oh, Heather, oh my goodness, so many gems. Thank you for sharing with us today. Where can people find you? Where can they find SCORE? If they need a mentor, where can they go?
So score.org, and you can request a mentor by location, or you can request one by expertise. So if you request one by expertise, just keep in mind you could be matched with someone in a completely different state. Some clients prefer to meet in person. Some do phone calls, some do emails. I do probably 99.9% of my mentoring over Zoom. Because again, we're in a rural area in New Hampshire, so some of my nearest clients are over an hour away. And then I have got clients that I work with out in California too, and I definitely can't drive over for a cup of coffee.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. We greatly appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I had a blast talking to you, and it was a pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you for joining us on Bringing Up Business. If you could, please take a moment to subscribe to and rate the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at bub.podcast. That's BUB.podcast. Finally, we'd love to get your feedback. If you have a comment or a guest idea, please let us know on our website, bringingupbusiness.com. Until next time, thanks for joining us. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Say bye-bye. See you later.
Bye-bye. See you later.
This recording is for informational purposes only and should not be considered business advice. Opinions expressed are as of the date of recording and are subject to change without notice. The views and opinions of guests on this program are not necessarily those of Umari Digital and its affiliates, which together we refer to as Umari Digital. Umari Digital is not affiliated with guests or their business affiliates unless otherwise stated. Umari Digital does not guarantee the accuracy or the completeness of the data presented herein. This recording is for informational purposes only, and the information, data, analysis, or opinion it includes or their use should not be considered business, financial, or legal advice. Umari Digital shall not be responsible for any decisions, damages, or other losses resulting from or related to the information, data, analysis, or opinions or their use. All business decisions are subject to risk, including possible loss of capital. Individuals should seriously consider if a decision is suitable for them by referencing their own financial position. Thank you.